If you want a comprehensive series of in-depth astrology information in an audiobook format, check out the 4-part Elements series by Stephen Forrest. I had the privilege of narrating it to audiobook, and it's a must for any astrology library. His complete life's work in a 4-volume set. The Book of Fire, Earth, Air, and Water. Direct links to all 4 books are on hightimelinebooks.com or available on Audible and Apple Books. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Thomas Miller, Robert Glasscock, and we're on a roll here with these listener questions. This is Claudia from Uruguay.
Hello, Thomas and Robert. This is Flavia from Uruguay, and I would like to thank you for this amazing podcast and for sharing your knowledge with us. I would like, if possible, for Robert to dig a little bit deeper into the difference between degrees. For example, I was born with the moon on 13 degrees of Cancer and my son on 18 degrees of Capricorn. I'm almost 5 degrees away from having a full moon, same as him. I think he has 5 degrees difference. So can you please, Robert, elaborate a little bit more into the manifestation? For example, I know you mentioned about 5 degrees apart, meaning 5 years after I was born. It will be when my representation of the full moon, sun opposition moon, will be awakened. But I'm a bit confused. Will it be 5 years or 5 months if we're talking about the moon and the relation between progressions and solar arc? I'm a bit confused with that.
Oh, thank you, Claudia. What a great question. I first began to notice the significance of the planet's degrees at birth, maybe, 30 or even longer years ago. And here it is. The degrees of the planets at birth will show you ages where that planet is prominent or even initiated. You may have a planet at 3 degrees of a sign. Its initial initiation in your life will be at age 3. But you can also multiply that by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So every 3 years, that planet at 3 degrees at birth will be prominent in your life according to the sign it's in, the house it's in, and so on. A planet in late degrees, let's say you have something at 24 degrees, then at age 24, that planet and everything that it symbolizes in the chart by the house it's in, the sign it's in, the houses it rules, will be initiated fully at age 24. But you can also divide that by, say, 3. It will be initiated to a degree at age 8, and so on. I also observed that the distance between 2 planets in an aspect at birth, like the one you're mentioning, Claudia, of 5 degrees separation between 2 planets in opposition, which you're right, I do have in my chart as well. My sun is 5 degrees away from an opposition with my moon is 5 degrees away from an opposition with my sun. And those harmonics work as well. And that's what all of this is based on, harmonics. So every 5 years, I will symbolically have a year of moon opposite sun. It repeats every 5 years. If you have 2 planets that are 60 degrees apart at birth, but that's a sextile. But let's say the sextile is between 2 planets, and one of them is maybe 58 degrees away, not 60. So you can look at these 2 planets and see, all right, that sextile is going to be exact about 2 years, 1 degree for a year. If a planet is off the exact sextile by 2 degrees, then every 2 years, those 2 planets will form symbolically a sextile. And this repeats throughout the life. So it's fascinating to study these angular separations between 2 planets in aspect at birth, figure out how many degrees apart they are to be exact, to make the aspect exact. And that number of degrees establishes a harmonic that goes and repeats all of your life. So, for example, you may have Saturn trine, let's say Saturn trine Venus by 6 degrees. 6 degrees apart from an exact trine. Every 6 years of your life, symbolically, that Saturn-Venus trine will be a prominent part of your life that year. And all I can suggest is try this. It requires a lot of thought and going back into your past. Sometimes you really will easily come up with an event or situation that happened that will convince you that this works. Other times you may not. I just learned something a couple of years ago about my mother and father before I was born, but it's there in my chart. I just learned it from my cousin, my father's sister's son, my cousin, who told me this. So it's a lifelong process, but it's fascinating to realize that these numeric degrees in the horoscope point to ages, 1 degree for a year. And so do the degree separations between planets in aspect at birth. Sometimes they're exactly opposite. And when they are, that opposition is in effect every year of your life. Other times they're off, like Claudia's or mine. That sun-moon opposition is off by 5 years of exactness. But every 5 years, I'm going to experience a moon-sun opposition in terms of what it means in my birth chart. And every year that you do re-experience these things, according to those harmonics, which are there in the birth chart to be read, you mature, you grow, you get better, you understand it deeper, you make more of it. It becomes something, a part of you that is rich with meaning and rich with insights. So I hope you'll continue thinking along those lines, Claudia.
Great, Robert. And I'd like to put some skin to this. I'd like to show an example. We talk about your chart quite a bit. I'd like to put mine up as an example here. So go to the show notes and you'll be able to follow that. The links to the charts, I think we're going to have more than one here, are at the top of the description in YouTube and the show notes in the audio podcasts. So can you find one of those harmonics in here?
Sure, you can take anything you want. You have Mars at 6 degrees and a half Scorpio. Your sun is at 6 degrees and almost 7 degrees, so roughly a half degree. So that's a constant in your life. Your Neptune's also at 6. All of your life, every day of your life, much less every year, you're under Mars, Neptune, Sun, because there's no difference between the exact conjunction. They're all exactly conjunct at birth. Let's take another one. You have Jupiter and Sag square Pluto. Pluto's at 5 degrees 46 minutes, so 5 3/4. That's Pluto. Jupiter is at 5 degrees and 1 minute, so it's at 5. So those are inexact, and that square is in effect every year of your life. Your Mercury at 0 degrees Sag squares Pluto at 5 3/4. So every 5 3/4 years in your life, you will be under Mercury square Pluto. Think about it. Pluto's in your 3rd house of relatives, among other things. Every 5 3/4 years, that Mercury-Pluto square is in effect. You see how this works?
Yes. So you mentioned harmonic, and that catches my eye because when I think of harmonics, I think of divisions of the circle. So I'm thinking of basically midpoints, etc. What are you referencing the harmonic? How do you tie that into this chart? Let's stay on that Pluto-Jupiter square, for example.
All right. In this context, by harmonics, I mean the literal degree. Every sign has 3 decanates, for example. Every sign has duods, which are 2.5 degrees. So basically, every degree is its own harmonic. Your Jupiter, for example, is at 5 degrees Sag. So every 5 years is a Jupiter in Sag in your 6th house year for you. Let's see. Jupiter also sextiles your North Node, which is at 3 degrees 43 minutes. So the difference between that is what, about 1.5 or 2? So every 2 years, you're under a Jupiter sextile North Node prominence. So the harmonics work both ways. With the literal degrees and minutes, if you want to take parts of a degree at birth, but also the degrees of separation from exactness, as long as they're in some kind of an aspect at birth. Your Saturn, for example, is trine your Pluto. Saturn's at 253, so let's call it 3 degrees Capricorn. Pluto's at 546, so let's call that 6 degrees Virgo. So every 3 years, you are under a Saturn trine Pluto aspect.
Got it.
You see what I mean? So the harmonics work both ways in terms of specific degrees at birth and also multiples of those degrees, or differences between the exactness of an aspect at birth.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to state that again.
Just one more. Well, just one more. Because I'm looking at your south node up in the 10th house of your career in Aries, and it's trine, and obviously the north node is sextile, that Jupiter-Mercury conjunction. So every 2 to 3 years, you are under Jupiter trine and sextile your nodes, which is terrific for your work in broadcasting. You see in the 6th house where that Jupiter is. Anyway, just wanted to extend it a little further to help clarify it.
Yeah, and this is one that I think takes a little bit to wrap our heads around. So again, just to restate this another way so that you can see it, what we're talking about is the degree, so let's just go back to the Pluto, is going to show up just shy of every 6 years in my life, that Pluto influence. Then you look at the aspect, so Pluto is trine Saturn. That is going to occur now what you do is you look at the difference between the Saturn position and the Pluto position, which is basically 3. You can see that, 2 degrees 53 for Saturn, 5:46 for Pluto. And that's the difference that he's saying that number of years, basically 3, means that aspect is going to come into play. Boy, I'll tell you what, you can slice this and dice this to where you don't even need to look at transits anymore. Just look at your own chart and find these aspects, and it'll keep you busy, I'm sure.
It's true, Thomas. If you look at your Uranus at 21, basically 21 Leo, every 20 to 21 years is a Uranus in Leo in your 2nd house year. Leo rules the heart. Uranus is opposite Chiron, the wounded healer, by 2 degrees. So every 2 years, Chiron in the heart and circulation. You see what I mean? Fortunately, Chiron trines your moon, and your moon and Uranus are sextile each other, which is very helpful for heart and circulatory conditions, but there it is. But every 2 years, Uranus rules astrology, among other things. It rules broadcasting and computer, audio, visual media. And so here it is in the creative sign of Leo in your 2nd house of income, opposite Chiron. So every 20 years, and you can divide that by 2 and get every 10 years, around 10 or 11 years as well. You can multiply it by 2 and say around 40, 41, multiplying just the degree, these harmonics at birth, which are given to us visually at birth. Play around with them, think about them, and see what you get. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's incredible. All right, so let's throw another layer on here, because I'm thinking the developmental arc, which is basically what you've been talking about.
Yes, sir.
We've done podcasts on this, so you could go back in the episodes. And by the way, on the funastrology.com website, we have a free PDF it's a log. We don't keep it completely current because some of the current episodes you can find just by going right down. But we do have a show log, so if you're interested in various topics, you can search it. It's a PDF, and it's available for free to download, funastrology.com, under the Robert Glasscock section. But the developmental arc is basically where you list your degrees from the earliest degree planet to the latest degree planet, and realize that everything that happens in your life is going to follow that pattern of time. And now what you're saying is you could add the same thing for the aspects and create that as well.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned developmental arc. Your planet of earliest degree is Mercury in Sag, and very closely followed by the nodes at 3. But Mercury in Sag is how you start every single thing, including your birth. And Mercury in Sag is the sign of the philosopher and the preacher. It rules religion, it rules metaphysics, it rules higher knowledge, higher learning, it rules communication on a mass level as compared to Gemini, which is on more of a local level. So everything that you begin, you are a natural philosopher, and you think big and you think far. And do you see what I mean? You can get tons of information
from one thing.
This. So everything that comes into your life, the first thing instinctively that you do is to think, how does this fit into the bigger picture of my life? Everything. Meeting somebody new, where do they fit into my life? The bigger picture. You see what I mean?
I do. It's amazing.
That's the developmental arc. And you can take each planet in degree order and see exactly how because the moon, remember from birth, as it transits, it's going to trigger each planet in order of its degree. So the moon does this every month of your life. So your first month of life, you're going to experience the moon triggering each one of these planets in this order. The sun triggers them every year of your life in the same order. So it gets built into your DNA to approach your life, starting with the planet in earliest degree and finishing with the planet in latest degree, which in your chart is the moon in Libra.
So to reiterate the point that we've been talking about with these aspects, let's just stay with that. Developmental arc Mercury at 0 is in a trine and sextile with the nodes at 343. So let's basically say 4. So every 4 years how would the moon's transit affect that aspect? It's going to hit it where?
Well, every time the moon enters a new sign, it triggers those planets in that order. It takes 2.5 days for the moon to go through one sign. So every 2.5 days, the moon will repeatedly, now it's obviously according to the sign the moon is in, it will trigger those planets in that order by different kinds of aspects, by conjunction or sextile or trine or inconjunct or whatever. But nonetheless, it's triggering them in the same order every 2.5 days. When the moon enters a new sign, it takes 2.5 days for the moon to go all the way, to go through a sign. And as it goes through that sign, it's going to form some kind of an aspect with every planet. And that's where this stuff gets built into your DNA, this response to life.
Okay, so take that Mercury node, trine sextile, 4. Every 4 what does that show up?
Well, if you're doing it that way, then you're considering the harmonic of 4, and it's basically 1 degree for a year. So every 4 years, you are in essence under a Mercury trine and sextile nodes. And one is in the house of the home and the foundation, the other one's in the house of the career.
Okay, so this is so fascinating. The wheels are turning, Robert, if you didn't figure that out. All right, so as we're recording this, the moon, and I've got another chart in the show notes for this, so check these charts out. The moon is at 19, almost 20 degrees Aries. All right, now we were talking about that Mercury at 0 Sag to the trine up to the south node at 3 degrees Aries. When did the moon affect that trine aspect?
All right, the moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours. So it is 16 degrees away from the node, the north node. So divide 16 by 2 and you get about 8 hours ago.
Goodness sakes. Wow. So the way we could apply this just on a lunar transit like you were talking about, when the moon was at 0 Aries, it hit that Mercury, boom, right? Happens here to be a trine. And
that was about 10 hours ago.
And then when it was at 3 degrees, it hit that south node, exact, as a conjunction. Boom, there's another one. Now, during that transit, did that trine between Mercury and the south node ever get affected by the moon?
Well, yeah. The moon entered Aries, and the minute it entered Aries, it trined your Mercury, which was about 10 hours ago, to then trining your Jupiter a couple of hours after that, and so on. So that's the transiting moon, and not much is going to happen with these fast-moving transits. But still, it's fascinating to look, and especially you get into the slower-moving planets, anything from, say, well, Mars on out, certainly. Then you've got some really interesting coincidences between events or states of mind and states of being. And Mars or Jupiter.
Kidding.
And Jupiter will be in a position, in a particular degree for several days.
What this is opening up for me is it really is important to know the midpoints of our aspects, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. You bet. But, for me, when I began to first observe this all those years ago, I thought, this is just like you said earlier. It's not that you don't need to look at the transits and so on, but your birth chart is telling you right up front ages of events. and ages of situations and ages of development, just by the degrees that the planets occupy and also by the degree separations between a planet and its exact aspect to another planet. Both of those are harmonics. They're established at birth.
This is amazing.
Fascinating.
Just
Fascinating
incredible
stuff.
Oh, it is. All right. Well, thank you, Robert. You've given us a lot to scratch our heads over and to think about. And thanks to Claudia, all the way from Uruguay, for asking a great question. If you'd like to book Robert for a reading, people ask, well, the information is in the show notes on the audio podcast and in the description of the YouTube podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.